It started as an ordinary afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood. A black woman, calm and composed, stepped out of her car, only to be approached by two white police officers. What began as a routine encounter quickly escalated into something far more troubling. The officers insisted on searching her, their tone sharp and their actions aggressive, despite her calm explanations and lack of any wrongdoing. Unbeknownst to them, the woman wasn't just anyone. She was married to someone they should have been very careful not to cross. As tensions rose and she found herself being wrongfully handcuffed, the reality of their mistake began to loom in the distance. Who was she, and how would their actions ripple through the department and beyond? By the end of this encounter, these officers would face a shocking revelation that would change everything. Stay tuned for the full story. The officers were firm, their words clipped as they ignored her calm insistence that she had done nothing wrong. To anyone passing by, it might have looked like just another traffic stop gone sideways, but for her, it was a moment of disbelief and frustration. She had always believed in fairness and justice, values her husband, the new police chief, had spent his entire career fighting to uphold. Yet here she was, being humiliated on the side of the road, treated as though she were less than human. The woman, whose name they didn't even bother to ask properly, was driving home from a lunch meeting when she was stopped. Her polished demeanor and professional attire were met with suspicion rather than respect. She thought about her husband, who had just been sworn in as chief that very morning, and how this encounter might upend everything they had worked for. Still, she stayed silent, waiting for her chance to speak. As the officers rummaged through her belongings, the woman's mind raced. She thought about the delicate balance her husband had just stepped into as the first black police chief in their city. His appointment had been a beacon of hope for many in the community, a chance to rebuild trust and bridge divides. But now, here she was, caught in the very system he vowed to change. Every moment felt heavier as onlookers began to gather, their murmurs growing louder. She could feel the weight of their stares, some sympathetic, others judgmental. The officers, however, seemed oblivious to the growing crowd. Their focus was on asserting control, doubling down on their authority. One of them muttered something under his breath, casting her a sharp glance, as if to justify their actions. Yet, there was nothing to find, and deep down, they both knew it. Still, they refused to back down, perhaps too proud to admit they'd made a mistake. As the woman stood there, calm but resolute, her silence seemed to unnerve them. She knew the truth would surface eventually, but how much damage would be done by then? The woman remained composed, her steady gaze fixed on the officers as they continued their search. Her confidence, unshaken by their aggression, only seemed to frustrate them further. One officer, clearly agitated, began questioning her more harshly, asking why she seemed so calm. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully, but before she could respond, the other officer interjected, pulling something from her bag, a harmless item now being scrutinized as if it were evidence of wrongdoing. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, their unease palpable. Some reached for their phones, recording the interaction as tensions escalated. The woman knew these moments could spiral out of control, but she refused to let fear guide her. Still, her patience was wearing thin. How could they not recognize her? Her face had been in the news, her connection to the new police chief made clear during his highly publicized swearing-in ceremony. Meanwhile, one of the bystanders, a young man, stepped forward and shouted, "Do you even know who she is?" His voice sliced through the tense atmosphere, and for a split second, the officers hesitated. Confusion flickered across their faces, but they brushed it off, unwilling to relinquish control. The woman could sense the moment of reckoning drawing closer. Somewhere deep inside, they had to realize the enormity of their mistake. The question now was, would they stop before it was too late? The officers froze for a brief moment, the bystanders' words hanging heavy in the air. One of them scoffed, brushing off the comment as just another attempt to undermine their authority. But the other officer hesitated, glancing at the woman with a flicker of uncertainty. The tension crackled like static, and even the crowd seemed to hold its breath. The woman didn't flinch, her eyes steady as she waited to see what they would do next. Just as the uneasy pause stretched too long, a black SUV pulled up to the scene, its tinted windows rolling down slowly. Out stepped a tall man in uniform, his commanding presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. It was her husband, the new police chief, his face a mix of anger and disbelief as he took in the sight of his wife being detained. The officers' faces paled as recognition dawned. They stammered, fumbling for words to explain themselves, but the chief's piercing glare silenced them. Before anyone could speak, he raised his hand, his voice low and firm. "Let her go," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The crowd erupted in murmurs, phones still recording as the situation escalated. But just as they began to remove the cuffs, a call came through the officer's radio, reporting an unrelated incident nearby. The distraction gave them a moment to regroup, and one of them made a decision that shocked everyone. They refused to follow the chief's orders. "We're just doing our job," the officer said defensively, standing his ground. The chief's jaw tightened, the weight of the moment threatening to tip everything into chaos. All eyes were on him, waiting to see what he would do next. The chief stared at the officer who had defied him, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. The crowd was silent now, their eyes darting between the woman, the officers, and the man who had just revealed himself as her husband. The woman, still restrained, gave her husband a look, not of fear or anger, but of quiet confidence, as if to say, "Do what's right." The chief took a step forward, his voice steady but firm. "You've crossed a line. This stops now." The officer hesitated, his resolve beginning to crack under the weight of the situation. Reluctantly, he motioned to his partner to remove the cuffs. As the woman's wrists were freed, the chief stepped beside her, his protective presence impossible to ignore. Just as the crowd began to disperse, thinking the ordeal was over, the twist came. The young bystander who had spoken up earlier approached the chief, holding up his phone. "Sir, I think you need to see this," he said, showing a video he'd recorded moments earlier. The footage revealed the officers discussing their intent to target the woman before they even approached her, using language that made their bias unmistakable. The chief's expression darkened as he watched, the evidence of misconduct now undeniable. The crowd, sensing the gravity of what had just been uncovered, began murmuring again, that anger turning toward the officers. The woman, standing tall beside her husband, spoke for the first time. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "It's about everyone who's ever been treated unfairly." With the video in hand, the chief made a promise in front of everyone. There will be accountability for this, and for anyone who thinks this kind of behavior is acceptable. The officers were escorted away under the watchful eyes of the crowd, their fate now sealed. As the woman and her husband walked back to their car, the tension finally broke, leaving behind a powerful reminder of the change still needed, and the strength it takes to make it happen. As the couple drove away, the woman looked out the window, reflecting on everything that had just unfolded. She knew this moment wasn't just about her. It was a wake-up call for the department her husband now led, and for a system that too often failed people like her. Sitting beside her, the chief tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his mind racing with the steps he'd need to take to restore trust and ensure justice, starting with the officers who had crossed the line. Word of the incident spread quickly, sparking conversations across the city. The video captured by the bystander became a catalyst for change, shining a light on issues that could no longer be ignored. The woman's grace under pressure and her husband's firm stance inspired others to speak out, to demand accountability. In the end, the moment that could have shattered their resolve only made them stronger, reminding everyone that courage and justice go hand in hand.